Recording in progress.
And we're back in third quarter planning. Adam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're just going to start. So good afternoon and welcome to the IIPP Forum 2024, where we will be rethinking the state in the era of climate emergency. This is hosted by the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, or IIPP, at University College London. My name is Nora Clinton and I'm head of the Mission-Oriented Innovation Network at IIPP, and the forum will go on for the next day and a half, and I will be your host for that time. The Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose brings together cutting-edge academic theory with teaching and policy practice to change how the state is imagined, practiced, and evaluated to tackle societal challenges. So over the next day and a half together, we want to rethink with you the role of the state in an era of climate emergency by examining different tools and at differing scales. From a macro view of the topics of finance, industrial policy, and digital state capacity, through to the meso and micro scales on the role of design and the work of net zero mission managers in driving transformative change. We will do this in discussion with experts from across academia and policy. So thank you all for joining us today, both online and in person. As you may know, we have a full agenda over the day and a half, and this evening we will also be having a public lecture at the Gustav Tuck Theatre at UCL, and we are hoping to welcome approximately 200 guests to this space to discuss these topics together. So just on a very practical level, we have provided you all with a forum microsite, which displays the full agenda for the forum. We want this to be a rich conversation with you, and so we will be using Slido throughout, where you can ask your questions of the panelists. When it comes to just some housekeeping, there are no fire drills planned, and so if you do hear any, please follow the green signs and leave quickly by the nearest exit. But all in all, we're looking forward to spending some time with you here together, and we're here, there's quite a big IIPP team here together to answer any questions that you may have. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Professor Rainer Kattel to the lectern. Professor Kattel is the Co-Deputy Director at IIPP UCL and Professor of Innovation and Public Governance. He has published extensively on innovation policy, its governance, and specific management issues. Prior to joining IIPP, he led the Ragnar Norsk School of Innovation and Governance in Estonia for 10 years and has worked as an expert for the Prime Minister of Estonia, the OECD, UNDP, and the European Commission. So welcome to Rainer.
Thank you very much, Nora. And yeah, welcome everybody. Not that I see you, but because in these bright lights. But it's so nice to see many old friends and colleagues coming back to IIPP, and students, former students, current students. It's great to see, and also hopefully we will make many new friends and colleagues over this. Well, it's actually billed as a 1.5 days, but it's pretty much a 2-day event, because today we will go quite late into the hopefully warmer London night than has been the case over the past 2 days. And yeah, so just to remember that the final session will be in a different building. So, but follow the people who look local. They will bring you to UCL building, and there we will have a session led by Mariana Mazzucato and other really interesting economists in the room. So yeah, I'll do a very brief introduction to why we are here and what do we try to do here as an institution, but also over these 2 days, and also ease into our first panel with that as well. So let's see whether it works. Yes, perfect. So many of you, of course, have seen this slide before. I think that we at IIPP very much start from this vantage points that innovation, the way we think about innovation, has been quite strongly changed over the last 10 or 15 years. So as Mariana Mazzucato likes to say, it's not only about the rate of growth, but also the direction of growth. And in terms of today, we see a lot of discussion around AI, sustainability, just transitions. They're all about directionality, which way we actually want innovation to shift and shape our societies. But of course, when we talk about directionality, we always talk about agency. Somebody's doing that directionality, somebody's giving that directionality, right? And that's why, of course, we are so interested in IIPP to think about what is the role of public organization, the state, in this directionality of societies. And hence, we are really interested in both the policy and the ideas, the big academic ideas that shape societies, policy ideas, but also how do you actually implement them? How those ideas become day-to-day activity for public organizations? What does it mean to change those day-to-day activities? So we are trying to bring together both economics, the new economics, and new government, new state thinking, and fuse it into something that actually gives this innovationist political statement a meaning. What does it mean to be a civil servant and work in that environment and to take that into your heart? So we are very much, we have a mission because we are very much about mission-oriented thinking, and we are indeed very strongly focused on sort of rethinking the ideas around statehood, what does it mean to be a civil servant, public sector organization, all of those things. Because in many ways, if you look around and you go into today's government offices and buildings and infrastructure, this was created in late 19th century predominantly and to solve late 19th century problems, I think. So how do you actually build a different kind of organizations that is capable of dealing with today's challenges where a lot of those things have changed? The late 19th century state was very much about nation building. Today we don't maybe believe anymore in nation building because all of us live in very multicultural societies. What does a nation even mean in that context? And sort of that gave us meaning, but now we need to build that meaning from a very different vantage point, I think. So all of this sort of bringing together the idea of the state in the growth and innovation, but also what is the economics that the state is founded on, how we actually think in public sector about the economics and the role of the state in markets in general. So we are proud to say that we want to create this kind of a Mont Pelerin movement to counteract the neoliberal understanding and the ideas of the state. Obviously, we are not alone in that. There's many interesting actors. Many of you are here in the room who are part of that. So that's the main reason I think we put up things like this forum. We want to bring together like-minded people to think along and to share their experiences and hopefully get closer to how do we actually practice this idea of innovation is political. So these are the things that we are focused on, the areas that we are really interested in our academic work, in our policy work, but also in our teaching. And as you will see later on, the sessions actually touch up on all of those. So we have a strongly sessions focused on sort of the value and what does it mean to create value, what is the economics of that, and how do we understand that. We are looking at shaping of innovation and institutions. And today, the session following the public sector capabilities one is focused on finance. So you see all the breadth of what we are trying to do as IIPP. And as you might see and look around in the room, there are students, academics, but there is also many practitioners. So we are very keen to work together with practitioners, to learn from them, to provide them with feedback and ideas. So what we call practice-based theorizing is something that, again, this forum should be an embodiment of. So we try to bring together academics and practitioners to discuss how can we get forward and trying to solve the challenges. And one of the key ideas within that, of course, is this idea of public sector capacities and capabilities. So if you want to rethink the state and want to talk about implementation, we really have to understand what are the capabilities and capacities that public organizations possess. So a lot of this thinking has been around sort of the idea of a state capacity. As I said, state building has been very much the focus of thinking and politics. And here in this slide, we try to bring together sort of our IIPP's approach to public sector capacities. This actually comes from a student of us, Kate Reeks. I don't know whether she's in the room. She probably has to work in Croydon Council today, but hello to Kate. She sort of formulated this as a building. If you look at it, of course, at the bottom you have this structural buildings can't be without an infrastructure structure, and the states are the same. But these are also things that are very difficult to change quickly. You can't change constitution from one day to the next, or you can't rethink institutional frameworks like civil service systems. You can't just say, here's another system for you. It doesn't work. So it takes these very long cycles of changing them. And that's, of course, the reason why particularly the current sort of the ideas of the state are very much focused on this lower level, the infrastructural level, because this is where we thought we can solve many of the conflicts in our societies. We think of the contestation institutions and separation of powers and all of these institutional frameworks. And so we have given much less thought to what does it mean to think of organizations that are day-to-day trying to solve problems. How do we procure things, for instance? This is not an institutional or infrastructural issue. This is a day-to-day issue for many public organizations. How do we make procurement more focused on sustainable solutions, for instance? That is a routine question for day-to-day activities. And then on top of that, you have things that reshaping our existing resources, our budgets, our human resource systems, what we call dynamic capabilities. So how do you actually reshape and focus, refocus existing resources, existing ways of working is something that we are very interested in. And this sort of the three layers provides you hopefully with a broader context of the idea of public sector capacities and capabilities. And hopefully you will see that throughout the next 2 days, we will touch upon all of those layers. And this is something for you to keep in mind. Where does your work situate here? What are you most interested in? Long-term, shorter-term, more dynamic, more infrastructural, structural issues. They can be both. And I'm sure all of you work in a sort of a mixture of these layers. But it's for you maybe interesting to think, where is my focus? Where is my organizational focus? Where do we actually work on an everyday basis? Where is our impact mostly located in this graphic? And we'll come back to that as well. And also, if you look at the program that follows, it's almost like an hourglass. So we start with the broader structural, infrastructural issues. We talk about public sector capacities in a broad sense. Then this is followed by finance. How do we actually can redirect finance towards sustainable solutions? So financial systems are very big systems in economies. So again, we won't change them by Monday. Some of the other things you might change by Monday, but financial systems you won't. It takes time, so it's a bigger macro system that we want to change. Tomorrow morning and before the noon, we go much more focused on the level of organizations, on the dynamic levels of capabilities. We will discuss the role of design. Dan Hill is already sitting here in the front row. Hello, Dan. And so we'll actually see what are those tools and capabilities, skills also on the individual level, practiced in today's organizations to tackle some of those thorny challenges. And then again, in the afternoon, we go broad again. We go into digital public infrastructure. Again, big structural things that can really shape societies, but take time to build. And so this is the hourglass. We broad, narrow, broad. Again, keep something that in mind. And I think this sort of brings my introduction to close, and I have the pleasure also of introducing, or you want to do it? Or I can do it, because since I'm here already, so we don't need to do the palais of going up and down. So this is just to provide you with this broad canvas of where we are, why we talk about capacities and capabilities, and hopefully you keep that in mind and locate your own ideas and questions, use the Slido form, and or talk in coffee breaks, talk about those issues where you are locating your own organization and your challenges. So the first panel we have is a wonderful set of academics and practitioners. And so I will introduce, I think we have to start from Busani, as he is online. I hope he is online. He's the only person from this panel is online. He's a principal at the National School of Government in South Africa. So he's between the academic and practitioner world, and hopefully straddling both. Then we have Abir Talak. You can come front. Director of the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation in UAE. And the center, I understand, is already 10 years old, so great. Yep, come here. Then we have Susanna Porras, who is Professor of Innovation Governance, Copenhagen Business School, and has been writing about the idea of capacities for a long time, and one of the leading thinkers in this space. Please come forward as well. And last but not least, we have Francisco Cantani, who is an extraordinary secretary for state transformation. So no small title here, but from a very interesting Ministry of Management and Public Services Innovation from Brazil. Yeah, so, and I'll go and sit down there as well, and then we can start with this panel. Thank you very much, and I walk there now. I should speak in different voice probably now, but so what I've asked everybody to think about is two things. What I want to, and the panelists have a free rein how they want to address it. So first, I wanted to know what do they think on the level of sort of academic discussions about capacities and capabilities. Where are we? What do we know? What we don't know? Where are the caps? All of those things. It would be interesting to hear your reflections. And then the other side of that is practice, because we are practice-based theorizing, right? So what is in terms of practice? Where you see in practice that governments in your country, in your experience, are doing well, they know how to do well, the capacities are there, capabilities are there, and where are the areas where we lack sort of the practice of capacities and capabilities? And I thought, because we have Pusani is online, so I thought we start with you, Pusani. Everybody has 5 to 7 minutes to give initial reactions or their initial ideas. And then I'll do a bit of like a conversation between you two, and you're free to ask each other questions, of course, as well. And then we throw it to you in the audience as well. So, Pusani, floor is yours.
Yes, good evening to you, and good evening to all the colleagues who are attending. Hope you can hear me. Thanks for accommodating me whilst I am unable to be with you there. So, I mean, congratulations again to UCL and the IIPP for hosting this important engagement, and mostly for reviving the conversation about what needs to be done to address the lack of skills in the public sector. I must start by saying, in South Africa and in many countries in the global south, we have seen a trend of the de-skilling of public sector officials, starting with those at political level and then coming to those who are bureaucrats who are employed. This de-skilling of the public sector happened in two ways. At a political level, and I'm mentioning it because politicians are the ones who make decisions, whether they were passing policies and laws on industrial policy or any other. We've seen that there has been a lot of disincentive on building the capabilities of those who make decisions, who are elected officials, to the extent that they are unable, for example, to determine a clear-cut national and regional development agenda that prioritizes such things as industrial policy, building human capabilities in society, increasing manufacturing, having a clear export, led program. That is a consequence of the de-skilling that has happened at that level. And so we see in many countries in the global south where politicians are very happy that they think they have a national development plan or something of that sort. But when you drill down into it, you realize that it is actually very hollow, because we have had in the global south a class of politicians who are not in a position even to lead what is called a national development agenda, as I call it, because it requires the ability to manage compacts, mobilize stakeholders, lead society, and also then provide necessary resources that are required. In many instances, you see in the global south that at political level, there are ambitions about increasing exports and manufacturing and so on. But if you were to reverse and look at the decisions that they make as cabinet or whatever other structure, you will see that in the majority of cases, those decisions are not supportive of what they will call a national development agenda, as it were. And then also the de-skilling of the bureaucrats, of public sector officials. I don't need to say much about it because Mariana has written recently an important book that talks about this idea of infantilizing the public sector, because we learned over the past 30 years or so through the Washington Consensus that we can hollow out the state by agentifying everything that can be done within the system and end up going outside. And as a consequence, therefore, we've been de-skilling people who are in the public sector. Why does this thing matter? It matters because the type of complexity that we see in society today, and you see it both in scholarship as well as in practice, is that you require the capacity first and foremost to develop and agree on a national development agenda, which of course must include such things as industrial policy. And secondly, you need these capabilities because with the endemics and pandemics, such as climate change that we are facing today, to the extent that countries may have to make strategic shifts on their own national development agendas, on their budget, on institutional architecture, and so on. If they are unable to rapidly make those changes, this crisis will be another lost lost crisis, as we have seen in the past that these crises, can be missed. So it is important, therefore, that we build dynamic capability to be able to do that. There is another endemic that is happening in many countries in the global south, which is digital transformation. And of course, it's linked to broader issues of innovation as well as how you help the state to deliver its services in a much more effective way. If I use the UN language where they say leave no one behind, we see that there are instances where those who must make decisions, including those who are practitioners, are left behind, and that the conversation on digital transformation remain primarily a conversation amongst experts who are found in universities, but in the main they are found in consulting organizations and so on. This then robs countries of the ability to adopt and adapt technologies that can be used to re-engineer the manner in which we deliver public services to the people in the most efficient way. And there are case studies, for example, here in South Africa, where during COVID-19, we could provide a social relief of distress grant to people who otherwise could not go into the offices to make applications themselves, but they were able to use such basic technologies like WhatsApp to make the application, and they were processed successfully during that period, which was much less than what would have happened in countries like the UK, where some of those services were outsourced. And finally, in many of the countries, there is a lot of political polarization, even where there is stability, but there is no agreement between the contending classes, the states, and other stakeholders in society. We do require the building of the strength of the system so that those who are in the public sector can negotiate compacts. Because without compact, many of the things we wish to do, whether through industrial policy, through innovation, to managing the pandemic of climate change, those things will not be achieved. More so because in many of the countries in the global south, there are critical skills that reside outside of the state. It may take a little bit longer to rebuild those, but I must then add that when we do those strategic partnerships, it must be clear as to what are we looking for. If we look for capacity, for example, to master execution diligence within the system, it must be clear that this is the type of a partnership that we require, because these are the objectives they will give. And as Mariana and others have said, that there must be very clear conditions for how and why we enter into these partnerships. Let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Puzani. And I suspect there is perhaps a thread emerging, which is around capabilities and skills of politicians, which I think everybody who's been following the elections across the world, and particularly perhaps in the UK, has probably witnessed the incredible downfall, if you will, of skills of politicians. But this is something that I think we can keep in mind and maybe come back to at one point. But I'll go over to Abir now for your initial reaction.
Thank you. So we are, good afternoon, right? Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. It's with pleasure to be here. Abir Tahlak from the Mohammed Rashid Center for Government Innovation. Lovely to be in a panel like this. And I think the words you mentioned, Rainer, just in your welcome note, is direction is important. And after several engagements with Mariana, it's always good, and she constantly reminds us that a public sector that doesn't have the capability, the dynamic capabilities, will not be able to innovate or to actually shape policies like tech policies, to work towards the, let's say, the positive societal outcomes that as any public sector would want to go towards. We had a quick chat just before the panel where we were sharing some thoughts about how the Mohammed Barashid Center for Government Innovation is turning 10 years. And I think the thought there is when there's a new direction or a new purpose being communicated by leaders, it is important to focus on building those capacities and building those capabilities as kind of a separate activity. But then 10 years down the road, where we have reached in the UAE, we see how public servants have matured. And after 10 years of being exposed and reminded of the purpose, being a young nation and the UAE, I think achieving those we've progressed remarkably within the 50 years that we've been around. I think even leadership keep reminding us that what got us here will not take us there. So direction is as important as speed, the purpose of why we exist as public servants, how to maintain this dynamic, transformative public capacity is a key question that we keep asking ourselves in the UAE. I would love to give two concrete examples because we believe that building capabilities is done by doing. And I think that's, again, after 10 years of culture building, capacity building, mindset shifts that we've been doing back in the UAE, we've reached to a point that it is important now to focus on impact and implementation and doing. And then this is how we've shifted our building capabilities and capacities to kind of a different methodology on how to tackle some of the main challenges that we're facing. So one of the two concrete examples that I would love to share with everyone here is the government accelerators. So we do have a government accelerator, and then it's not your typical startup accelerator program. It's a dedicated vehicle that we work towards pressing clear challenges that the government is working on through a 100-day methodology, and we have a new 50-day methodology where we kind of invert even the hierarchy of what you'd expect in public sector, where we get frontliners, we put them in that room with the decision makers, and we have a public leadership commitment to solve this challenge in a specific time frame, which is our 100-day methodology, and now we introduced the 50-day. So even the dynamics of bringing them together on one table and making them work together, and then encouraging this public, private, civil society to come together to solve one goal, clear goal. That by itself, this platform, has shown over the years huge results. And this is kind of an intervention that we do from a kind of core of government that we work with the whole of government. We have more than 1,200 participants to date. We've worked with our local and federal entities and even other countries from Uzbekistan to Senegal, across the globe, and then with organizations like the WHO. So it's working, it's a vehicle that we use, and I think it is about building capabilities and capacities, and it's not about training, it's about when public servants come and practice it and try out new ways and methodology to get to that goal. So it's by doing. Another concrete example that I would love to briefly talk about is the Ministry of Possibilities. So that's a platform that we have in the United Arab Emirates. And I was lucky enough to be, part of the founding team. So the Ministry of Possibilities is about a different type of kind of projects and initiatives. We're talking about transformational projects, interventions in government. It's not about the incremental now, where again, it's based on three main pillars, which is scanning, stretching, and prototyping. So this ministry is a whole platform where we focus on scanning, and when we talk about scanning, is scanning the world for the non-obvious, below radar, the counterintuitive solutions that's happening. Examples like we found barbers who try to work with youth and men with mental issues to reduce that. We're talking about a startup that is working with a local government to shift data centers to forests, how to get the archives, the government archives, and encode it in the DNA of plants. We're talking about a research lab that's working in Kenya to include elephants in the policy-making processes. So this is the kind of activity that we scan for. And this is an invite for everyone here in the room. If you're working on something interesting, counterintuitive, below radar, please reach out to me. So what we do is, after scanning, we go to stretching. So stretching is where we stretch the thinking, and we matchmake them with challenges and entities in the UAE. And we create those sub-teams, those temporary teams, where the main purpose is, you have a challenge. We found an interesting case, whether it was globally or from the UAE, who are doing things differently. Can you, and how might you take that concept and apply it in your context for your challenge? And then we end up with the prototyping. So it's not just about ideation and concept development. It's let's now prototype. Let's lock the team. Let's work together. Try to achieve it with that thinking. So that's a new way, to be honest, how we disrupted our own government and how we do our usual work is by doing. Get the teams, expose them, let them do things, have a time frame, let it be clear, and then this is how we work towards it. So I think, again, it's not about technology shaping us, it's how we as public servants and the public sector can actually even direct policies or tech to what helps us achieve our North Star or our mission. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to focus on doing and how do we, because when we think about public sector, we think they're always doing something, right? But and I think the question often is, what are they doing? And I think the distance between the actual or street level or whatever we want to call it activities is where some of the problems come from. That the learning cycles are so long, the by the time we're done by evaluating a policy, everybody has moved on. So nobody knows, why did we do this policy? And I think there's in UK, the National Audit Office has data that there's like 80% of big projects that nobody really knows whether they work or not. It's like they're kind of there, but nobody has a sense whether they're good or bad. And if something is not good or bad, nobody changes them, right? So because they're just there, they keep on going. And I was also reminded by something that Dan Hill said when he started at Vinnova, Swedish innovation agency, and Dan said, or asked the question, why are innovation agencies not innovating? They're not actually engaging with innovation. I think this is a very interesting way of bringing the public sector to doing actually things. And I think this is an important change in perspective. But we go now to Susanna and to your perspective, and floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's very stimulating to listen to practitioners because, I come from a very theoretical world, so it's kind of really refreshing. Thank you very much for inviting me to come here. I'm currently finalizing a research project called Capacitor, which is capacity in the public sector for the green transitions. And it's based at Copenhagen Business School. And basically what we have been doing is going through the literature, which is a huge literature. And we realized that there were kind of two big families of the way in which the academia has been dealing with aspects of capacity. One is a really much kind of a static approach, one can say, which is basically understanding capacity as the potential, as something that there is there, you just need to be kind of activated. So if someone or something or the state has the capacities because it has that potential. And usually it's actually linked to aspects of resources. Typically a resourceful kind of state will be considered to have a lot of potential versus another state that has more kind of limited resources. So there's a huge bunch of literature, sometimes in kind of rather normative perspective. Then there's another tradition which is more or less following what we have been hearing here, which is more about this kind of, aspects about doing things. Kind of the capacity is the enactment of a decision to do something about. And here comes the aspects of the action, the kind of enabling and the kind of agency. This is a little bit theoretical, but it's not trivial because what happens is that when we engage in discussions about capacity, we oftentimes think very much in one direction or the other, whether kind of both are very important. And that is actually quite important because in some contexts, we see some public sector organizations that really have a lot of resources and yet things are not happening. Or we might actually have the opposite. Public sector organizations, like for example, two municipalities that are kind of very similar to each other, everything else equal, as economists love to say, they will actually do things quite differently because it's actually about the enactment. And oftentimes when you come about these kind of sustainability aspects, what happens is that there are already kind of the directions more or less set up. And I say more or less because sometimes there is a mandate in some kind of very ambitious kind of very high level. We want to kind of, reduce CO2 emissions by 50% before 2025. It's around the corner, by the way, or 2030. So there comes some kind of goals. There might be some kind of policy instruments being put forward, but then nothing really happens. And an example kind of, be when there was this kind of situation, there was this kind of lunch, and then the municipality said, well, but who's actually doing it? So what happens is that this enactment trying to mobilize those resources, and many times the resources are not there. Sometimes there is many decades of hollowing out of the state, which is a very big problem in some contexts. There are huge political dilemmas. For example, when talking to the municipalities we're studying, they say, yeah, but for us the dilemma is whether we want to invest more money or time or resources into solving kind of this kind of green transition or into our public schools. So sometimes those kind of day-to-day aspects are not easy to cope. But here comes with the third dimension, which I think is actually quite important, which is the entrepreneurial role of the state. Oftentimes we see organizations that have a task to perform. A hospital needs to cure or treat patients and of course try to cure them, but treat them, and that's the core task they have to do. So when there is any kind of third aspect coming in, like saying we want to kind of do it in a green way, The problem, yes, but our core task is to, first of all, cure the patients. But sometimes what happens is that resources are just not there. So sometimes finding these resources can be actually quite difficult. And one example that thinking in terms of what Busani mentioned, becoming a negotiator. I can explain to you a wonderful story. So the way in which the entrepreneurial role of the state is being conceptualized at organizational level entails many different types of roles. There was this kind of person inside a hospital said, it cannot be possible that we are throwing away every year around 1 million surgical equipment. Every time there is a surgery, a doctor operates, uses a knife, and that knife is thrown away. Thrown away, not being kind of, the metal being reused. No, thrown away, kind of burned. So the metal is gone. And it cannot be true that we're spending 1 million of those a year in just one of the hospitals that we have in Denmark. So she started to think, can we actually engage with committed kind of doctors and nurses who really see the problem? We are throwing away some resources. So starting to think about resources in different ways. Not only the staff that we have, not only the budget that we have, but also the resources that we're using and throwing away. Can we just rethink? So they were actually starting to buy kind of, equipment that is actually now to be sterilized, right? So that means that, of course, the procedures, the protocols are completely different. So you need to rethink the whole protocol. So they had to negotiate inside the hospital. They had to negotiate also with professional health. And so they also need to kind of, they became some of them kind of, facilitators for some other units to do the same. So all this entrepreneurial role became actually in different kind of, different mini roles that were performed while trying to kind of push that agenda ahead. So that actually brings forward back to the whole thing that capacity building is in the doing, is in thinking about resources to mobilize alternative resources that might not seem to be there, but they might be there. And that actually brings forward to the scales of the timing, right? And I like very much that. I feel very inspired, Rainer, with what you said, that the different kind of time scales, because I think that we're thinking very much into action and resources and mobilizing those kind of skills and capabilities, and also different types of roles, but also the scales of when and how can things happen. And in the green transition, what happens is that the problem is that we are suffering from a lot of what we were discussing before the presentation. We're suffering from a very acute need to start thinking, to do things differently. So the time is short, and the need is actually huge, but there are dilemmas and paradoxes because, back into the example or the metaphor, the patients need to be cured. And we should not forget about that. But we can definitely find much better ways to do that and rethinking our roles and our capabilities in much more dynamic ways.
Thank you very much. Susanna? Yeah, I think it's what is really challenging for many public organizations is how do you manage for these kind of, as you say, this almost like orchestrating, connecting all of those capabilities that are not maybe in your job description, but they are outside of that. It requires energy to actually dedicate and the managers to direct people. And it's also difficult to measure this kind of impact because we are usually not putting that into KPIs or what have you. And I think that's where a lot of the challenges that many organizations are facing, that people are actually convinced that they need to do something else, but then the sort of the day-to-day routines are actually quite different. And there is the lack of this slack capacity in a way go ahead.
Yeah, and then I asked also the hospital director, why are you engaging in this? And he said, well, of course, because we believe in the idea, but there's something else. There's the generation set. We are definitely lacking a lot of health professionals. The only way of attracting, of making hospitals an attractive working place is to show them that we are kind of green. Because that's kind of, they don't want to work in whatever places, they want to work in places they believe they're core to their own values. So that was actually also a strategy for them to get into the core resources, which is basically staff.
Absolutely. And before we go to our last panelist, I would like everybody to start thinking about if you have questions for the panel. And we will, I will come to you very, very quickly. And hopefully there is something happening on Slido. I don't know how to access Slido, but I'm sure there are people in the room who can do that. I realize I sounded old all of a sudden, but because Anyway, I still think I'm like 27, but I realize I'm not. Francisco, so we started from a global south perspective, and now we go, I think it was always on. Go back to the global south.
Okay, coming from the global south, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a privilege being here with you. I'm probably one of the seniors in this room, and it's a privilege discussing these topics with you. I'm from the old era, so it's another story. And I was telling Rainer before, during 20 years, we only discussed the results. We couldn't discuss anything else, just results. Results was a kind of mantra. You begin to discuss capacity building, institutional results. And now, fortunately, we're now beginning to discuss, in the last decade, capacities. I think the challenge to join in both these debates, capacity for results, what capacity for what results. And I think that IIPP and most of the researchers here, they are doing extremely important work. We went through decades of the consensus, Washington Consensus, new public management, and for those who work with the public interest, those were tough times, especially in the last decade. And I think that when we talk about capacities, at least from my country perspective, we're talking about three challenges. Capacity building, for the first time, capacity rebuilding, and capacity building better. So these are different things. And in many states where the institutions were dismantled, it's hard to redo some works that took AIDS. The other thing I'd like to mention is that I think it's important to work with a taxonomy in terms of capacities. When you talk about capacity, we're talking about many things. We're talking about tangible stuff, we're talking about subjective, we're talking about values, we're talking about networks, capacity that you can't really put a price. They are tacit, they are implicit, they are not visible. And sometimes these capacities, they make things happen in adverse contexts. And that's the other point I'd like to emphasize. Context is very relevant. When we put together people from many places of the world, we tend to abstract the default conditions. And the default conditions are very different. Small countries, big countries, federations, unitary countries, developed countries, emerging countries, and we have to be careful about that. There's nothing wrong. It's wonderful to discuss together. I believe, I learned here in this city that diversity is a value and it's also a source of wealth, it's an asset. But we have to keep in mind that if we don't take into account our specificities, our context, we can be misled by the moment, the propaganda, the medium. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we're facing a time problem. I think Abir mentioned, and I'd like to put it also in a different way. Capacity building takes time. Institutional building takes years. I remember Rainer's diagram. He talked about 1 to 15 years, 1 to 30 years, 1 to 40 years. Okay, nice. Life today, it's a different game. Politics, is it Instagrammable? Because if it's not, it does not care. I don't care. How do you conciliate? It's not more short term, it's Instagrammable. Politicians became 100% oriented by communications. So communication comes first. Content, strategies, policies, programs come second. And the attention competition became a war. So I don't know how to conciliate this time inconsistency. As I mentioned, I come from the old era. I feel completely hopeless and helpless.
You talk about Instagram.
Well, the other point I'd like to mention is that the challenge of capacity building or institutional development, they involve dispute in terms of the agenda. In Brazil today, if you don't find the key entry point in terms of the media is climate change. The country has a natural vocation for these debates, etc. But then there's a cognitive dissonance. People from Amazon, they want, it's the poorest region of the country. It's the worst, it's the area where you have more water. It's the worst sanitation indicators. They want development. They want to grow. They want infrastructure. The Southeast and the world wants them to become a sanctuary. So okay, we have a problem. And paradoxically, the successive governments, international donors, development agencies, they just don't care for local government, for social policy at local level, for local infrastructure. They just don't care. But if it's to protect nature, all sorts of resources are available. So how do we explain to 30 million people living there, okay, but we need health, we need to educate, we need connectivity, we need to integrate, we need development, we need progress. No. So then we complain that the people in the region, they vote for the extreme right, and you have the most possible conservative governments in the region. Okay. Finally, I just want to say that this sort of debates and discussions and networks, I can't describe how important they are for a country like Brazil, where the political struggles are very hard and where the media does not support long-term issues, does not support equality, does not support inclusive growth, does not support inclusion. I joke that, okay, the future is green, digital, green, and inclusive. Inclusive? Really? I'm not so sure. So the inclusion, it's really a controversial political issue. And as the first slide of Rainer revealed, innovation is political. Innovation today became almost a synonym. It's not, but it became a synonym of change. So if you're going to change things, if you intend to change things in one direction, and this direction includes social justice, environmental protection, sustainable development, digital productivity and competitiveness, we have to square this circle in a different way. We need to find the proper narratives. We need to avoid, in Brazil we have you know the expression, I was Vice Minister of Environment for 5 years, and I tried to explain this to my people, it was tough. We have to stop to preach to the converted. Otherwise, you'll not go anywhere. We have the same problem with our economic team. The Minister of Finance, you can't do anything without them. But they alone, they will not go anywhere. So these are the challenges we're facing today. I think that in order to transform public policies, we have to have political structures, institutions, public capacities, and I use the word public, not only state capacities. We need a third sector, we need other players to join these efforts, otherwise it will be very state-centered, and I don't believe that a state-centered approach has a future anymore. We have to find a different way to build this alliance in order to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's wonderful to see how we came full circle. Busani started from the capabilities of politicians, and you brought it back to what the politicians are facing actually on a day-to-day basis. They have to deliver on an hourly basis, because if not, there's something on Twitter or Instagram or you're photographed in the bad position, and you have to react and you have to provide a new policy solution. Here is more money or more tax cuts or whatever that is. I think what Jennifer Polka has called the policy vomit is really the challenge we face, rather than the doing focus that we talked in the middle. So here we have, I hope Busani you can see as well, there is at least 4 questions. Do you think that it's a good idea to use AI from private companies to make more efficient public processes. I'll just read them to you, and we can then, each of you can choose whatever question you want to answer. What practices or approaches have been successful for cementing public capabilities despite employee turnover? It's outsourcing. Very interesting. How's global governance influencing public sector capacities in global transitions? Oh, there's so many. Can we go back to the... I hope somebody's, yeah. Oh, okay. Does anybody wants to take the microphone and ask the questions? Then we can, because there are obviously too many questions. So you shouldn't provide the people with technical capabilities to ask questions, because we can't control the room anymore. And loss of control, of course, is if anybody who you put your question in the slide, or you want to maybe ask it in public, so we keep them. Oh yeah, Nai, go ahead. And then we can read at the same time those questions and see whether you see something.
Thank you to all of our speakers. I really appreciate it. The question that I asked, I don't see it on there any longer, is, I think it disappeared.
You forgot your question.
Let's see. I don't know how to get it.
I'm pretty sure you asked, yeah, there's the global governance. Yeah.
Okay, how's global governance, particularly international organizations, influencing public sector capacities and global transitions? So this is with respect to digital and green, and what needs to change first.
Good, yeah, maybe we go to Pusani. So how is, from your perspective, the international organizations influencing the public capacity in South Africa?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Just a week ago, I was in a panel discussion with the president of the BRICS Bank. And amongst the issues considered was exactly this question that you are asking. And I put forward a proposition that multilateral institutions and other institutions of global governance need to put on the agenda the issue of reskilling or rebuilding state capacity, especially because there are countries in the global south that are too small on their own to be able to come out of the conundrum that they are in. This has got to be a global agenda, as much as issues of climate change are also a global agenda. If we do that, we will then reverse the trend of infantilizing the states, such that there is over-reliance on some institutions, because we are told that they can assist with policy design and support policy implementation, and we end up outsourcing those things as well. Because when you talk about digital transformation and the green transition, these are such important transitions that society is going through today, that without leading a concerted effort at a global, regional, and then at a country level, we will leave some of the countries behind. Let me give you a practical example. There are countries in the global south that have a deposit of critical minerals. These countries are under pressure from the global north to sign agreements so that people can have access to these minerals. And I read a report of the IMF recently, very unfortunate. They say that these countries in the global south must allow multinational corporations to decide how this can be exploited and how value can be created and shaped out of it. And you will then have these countries that are small and fragile, who will in fact enter into these agreements, either country to country or with multinationals, and they will sign away these critical minerals, which in fact might be their best possibility or a best chance for these countries to enter the industrialization frontier. But it then becomes impossible for these countries to understand that there's a possibility of an industrialization frontier here as a result of these critical minerals, which are needed for both digital as well as the green transition. And so if they have got the capacity, they will be able to negotiate and give better concessions. They will be able to have conditions that say there's a level of processing that must happen within these countries themselves. And then also there is a clear and a transparent overview of what will these countries be benefiting, because if we don't fix that, you have a discontent, as we see in many countries, because people believe that these governments are signing these contracts away. It is important, therefore, that we build the capacity to negotiate these contracts, and there are institutions like the BRICS Bank and many others that must build these capabilities in the global south, so people can negotiate contracts, can design a industrial policy using the resources which they have. They can be able to embark on strategies for technology transfer, and some of these things need to be done at a very rapid scale, because there might be no time to wait for them. So I do agree that there's a role for global institutions, especially like the BRICS Bank and others, to play in building these dynamic capabilities.
Yeah, thank you very much for this answers, Puzani. And I think it's really interesting to see how in the recent weeks there is because of all the sort of the global race to do industrial policy again in US and in Europe, and there's now US academics and policymakers are waiting, oh wait, there is a WTO somewhere, are we actually breaking maybe some rules? But then everybody realized, well, those rules really don't matter, I guess. But at the same time, when we talk about countries in the global south, those rules seem to be very important. I just tried to go through some of the questions. There's so many interesting ones, but I wanted to come to you, Susanna, first, because there's a couple of questions around research, the role of research and the role of next generation of researchers. What should they focus on? Because we have lots of youngish people in the room. And so what would you tell them to focus on in terms of research?
Oh, there are really many things to be focusing on. I think there are plenty of examples of what we call transformative innovation that actually brings aspects of public, private, and also tertiary sector innovation. And I think that's kind of, that will be kind of one focus where the public sector actually becomes an orchestrator for creating the conditions. There was one interesting question about whether the state is doing innovation or the state is orchestrating innovation. And I think it's kind of, it's not an easy, it's not an easy answer to this. In fact, I was thinking, I think that the Mariana's idea of the state as entrepreneur is very, very powerful idea. And then if you scratch a little bit more down the surface of what an entrepreneur actually means, there are so many roles that the state performs at once, right? It can be negotiating, it can be becoming a lead user, it can be actually pushing some specific safety aspects, so becoming a kind of watchdog, all at once when trying to create a new kind of, a new context, right? Creating new markets, as she's provided plenty of examples with. So, and I think that we need to kind of take specific sectors. We're looking at sectors like the maritime innovation. I don't know if you know it, but it's a beautiful example of Norway. Norway during the last 25 years, and that's the long scale, which I think I like this idea of the time scales. We need to chip them in much more actively. Norway in the year 2000 started with the idea of we want to create a kind of, greener shipping. Now, this is actually very difficult because I don't know how much you know about ships, but I mean, I'm co-authoring with an expert. And they're not using petrol, they're using kind of a very thick, really, really, really thick and very polluting. So the Norwegians started to say, we want to have a cleaner, so lower emissions for the air pollution, the cleaner air. Then they moved on into saying, let's push it a little bit further through public procurement to get to have something that is actually zero emissions. Is that possible? Well, yes, that would be possible if we put a battery on a ship. Well, batteries are very, very heavy. You need to have a completely new ship design. The maritime authorities say, no, we need to have safety because you have passengers, especially safety levels are higher than when you're a merchant ship. So all the regulations were actually tuned for safety, securing the safety of kind of, diesel running or even kind of this thick thing, and not for batteries. So the whole regulatory framework needed to be changed, and also the safety aspects. You need to train firefighters at high sea how to put down a fire that is not based on fuel, is based on a battery that catch fire. Now, they started with ferries because they're short distances. Now, if you just plug in your huge battery, the little village there will run out of battery, energy just at once. So you need to create a huge battery onshore to it up. All of this, and the whole thing is a whole system. It's changing the socio-technical system around maritime. Now, the Norwegians have made it. So now they have 80 ferries running on kind of, batteries. They made it the next step. They want to have it on ships on long distance. So batteries don't work because you need to have recharging them all the time. So let's put hydrogen. Hydrogen is highly inflammable. Its safety aspects are even more complicated. So there's a lot of technological solutions, regulators creating regulations, co-creating regulation, while they were actually talking with the technicians. All of this having a very patient capital from the state sitting there on the kind of the procurers saying, well, I'm not an expert in maritime technologies, but I want to have it greener, and the greener the better. So a lot of these kind of different public sector organizations were talking all the time with each other. That's a beautiful example about how a country being patient and through time has managed to achieve kind of quite cutting edge aspects. And there are lots of things about the example that I give about the health. In the health sector, there's a lot of green innovations because hospitals are big, kind of big organizations, and there's a lot of potential. Public schools, food, green in the food, a lot of attitude, a lot of mentality about how are we going to cope with differences and inclusion in the type of the food we're eating. There's a lot of technologies around that as well. So I think that there's so many actually aspects. So time scales, the different agency in terms of the different roles, becoming an orchestrator, a lead user, a gatekeeper, and so forth. There's kind of, unwrapping these kind of different roles of the state, I think will be a good way to, thank you. For hours.
No, yeah, so let's do a quick one for Abir and a quick one for Francisco as well. So for Abir, we have one very specific question, which is around, can you name an example of a challenge you present governments within the Government Accelerator program?
Okay. Government Accelerator, all right. There was an example of a project that came in. I don't know how many Arabic speakers are in the room. So we named the title of that project was Mabruk Mayak. So Mabruk Mayak means congratulations on what you have received of a newborn, but like literally, yeah. So we had a challenge, like most of us, so you have a newborn. Imagine the paperwork, the government offices that you need, the forms you need to submit and insert just to receive the birth certificate, the ID, and then the official passport. So this is one of, I think, close to my heart because I've been on the other side. I've been a user of the service. So what we did is it was a clear challenge. It was time consuming. You're just busy. The mother just gave birth. The father has to leave and go run and get the paperwork done and get the right papers on time. So that was a stressful journey. So this is a clear example of get the frontliners, the person who's going through it, and get the users here, get the parents, get the person who just issued a passport and an ID, and let them be part of the co-designing of the solution. So reducing that visits and the multiple kind of entities and touch points to one touch point. So that was a successful example that we worked on at the Government Accelerator. Now the only input you need to put is the name of your baby, because that's not something government can decide. So I put the name of the baby, and then within hours, you'll get it delivered with a package that has the official ID, the passport, the birth certificate, and to add on it, a personalized message from the president that congratulates you and congratulates that person. So I think that was a successful example that has been part of the government accelerators. Thank you.
Thank you. And Francisco, for you, the question was around what can civil servants do in the sort of the politically very charged environments, and as you were describing, also the rise of the right-wing politics.
Well, the first thing about political polarization, it's about they are also human. The people who think radically different from you, they are also human. They are part of your family, they are your friends, they are people with whom you live. So there's a degree of acceptance, of somehow respect that you have to adopt, even if the reciprocity is not there sometimes. I think that, at least in Brazil, the problem was that I was talking to Bridget during lunch. For me, it was familiar because I was raised in the authoritarian regime. So I was all those things again. Yes, but they were elected. So they had a popular mandate to behave and to implement their policies, to dismantle environmental policies, social policies, to destroy institutions. They were elected. And somehow they used, in many ways, their views to implement their beliefs. And they have the support of almost half of the country. Okay, that's life. The point about working the state, you work for the public, for the government, but you also work for democracy. You have to be able to find a way to work for new governments that don't share your beliefs. It's very common, the expression, I don't work for this government. Okay. So you are a civil servant, what will you do? I don't know. No? It's like, more or less, I don't pay taxes for this government. To which government what government do you pay taxes? The federal, the state, the local, there's a congruence between, no, you have to pay anyway. So if you're a civil servant, you have to find a way to hold your beliefs, to adopt your principles, but find a way to work with that government also and persuade them and convince and interact. The more you avoid interaction, the worse the situation becomes. So that's why I usually say that I have a very robust portfolio of failures, you know. And extreme behavior is not a monopoly of the extreme right, okay? Prejudice are not a monopoly of the extreme right. I'm sorry to say that, but I hope you understand. But I just want to mention that a good part of this debate is about identity policies. And this makes things complicated. Because you're not talking about programs, about public policies. You're talking about who you are. In some cases, you're talking about religion, religious beliefs. I thought that the separation between religions of state was something from the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. It's not anymore. So we are on the verge of religious wars again. And what about the secular state? Well, I don't know what happened. It's a little bit eclipsed by all these debates. But again, I think the pluralism is the way ahead. And in government, you have to fight to keep secularism in place, otherwise we'll have severe problems regarding our modus convivendi.
Thank you very much. I think we are exactly at time. And so I wanted to thank the panelists, Bosani Online and everybody here. Thank you very much for your contribution. And as you saw, there is like a very broad spectrum of questions. So hopefully this provides for the next 2 days the broad canvas you can play off of all the following discussions and debates. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nora.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rainer, and thank you again also to our panelists. Thank you to those of you online who have joined, and we're going to close this session online now. And as Rainer says, we've gone a long way from the start there and come really full circle around to even questions around democracy, which are so important currently, and especially given current elections, even in Europe. So at this point, I would like to invite Bridget to the lectern. She is our Applied Learning Development Lead at IIPP. And interestingly, Bridget has been thinking a lot about this idea of learning through doing, which has been brought up here in the panel. Really, the sense at IIPP is that is what our civil servants have to be doing, learning through doing and learning on the job. So I'm going to hand you over to Bridget. Thank you so much.
Hello. Rainer, you're completely right. I can see everyone's taller than me. There we go. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So Rainer's completely right about the lights. It's really hard to see you guys, which is awkward because we're going to do some audience participation. So bear with me if I can't see you all the way at the back. Next. Hey, so applied learning is one of the ways in which we at IIPP think about capabilities and capacity building. And we're very, very keen on this idea of a kind of co-learning process, right? So we talk about co-learning very much in the context of programs development, of policy, and how we like to approach applied learning, which is the artist formerly known as executive education. We don't like that term at IIPP, so we go for applied learning instead. Because we really believe in this kind of theory into practice learning. We think it's bidirectional, and so we're going to do a little bit of that throughout the process over the next few days, a little bit right now, and then I'm going to come back to you guys kind of late afternoon tomorrow. So you're going to remember everything I've said in this session, I'm sure. I'll test you on it, just in case. I'm kidding. We don't do that in applied learning. Just give you a quick kind of idea of what we like to do here. So, it's really about kind of ideas generation. All of the stuff that Rainer's slides were talking about, I see applied learning as central to and also supportive of. Can I also, say thank you to Rainer for letting Chico speak before me, because there's no way to go from like all of these mass globalization things into here's how we build programs, right? So thanks very much, Chico. I appreciate that. Just kidding. And so supporting civil servants and governments. So we're working both with Busani that we saw before, and also with Chico and INAP in Brazil. And these are all of the things that we try to do with our applied learning program. But I'm less interested in me talking and more interested in what you guys think. So we're going to do a really quick kind of temperature check. Wow, that's a really, really large temperature check. That's not what my slides look like. And so, this idea of kind of theory versus practice, the conceptual that Rainer was talking about in the whole panel, into the practicability of some of the work that we do. I'm just going to ask you guys to kind of do some hands at the moment. So who feels like we're doing incredibly well at theory into practice? And I'm definitely looking at all the IIPP. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, hands up. Are we doing incredibly well at this as a community at the moment? Is anyone going to be brave? No. Okay, interesting. Yep, interesting. We didn't bet on that, did we? Yeah, okay. We thought at least one person would be like, you know what, I'm doing amazing. Okay, so, and people who think we're doing, it's mixed, right? So we've got some kind of progress, but we've got the place to go. Hands for that. Kind of middle. Great. Okay, good. Good, Dan. Excellent. I'll come back to you on that. And then people who think we really have some serious work to do. Me, myself, I'm going to put myself in that category. And I don't mean us as a community, just us. I mean us as the world in many of the ways that Chico was talking about. I love that framework of rebuilding, incredibly hard to do, building up, and then building better. We haven't even really got to building better in a lot of cases. But the UAE example, I think, was really amazing, so thank you for that. Okay, so yeah, I think we're mainly kind of in the middle, but we might have some work to do. Great, okay, so it's a good temp check. One more kind of hands thing, and then I'm gonna ask you guys a question. So in terms of people in the room, how many people are in academia? Okay. Yeah, and you can raise your hand twice, I'm just interested, right? I like the multi-hyphenates myself, right? How many people in government, in practitioner space? Okay, great. So keep your hand up if you work at local government. Put your hand down if you don't. Interesting. Yeah, good. 2 hands. Fabulous. I love it. You need a third. You can put your foot up, maybe. Yeah, exactly. And then kind of think tank, third sector. Fabulous. Private sector, obviously no consultants. I'm a consultant. Private sector, fabulous. Anybody I haven't mentioned? No? Citizen, yes. No, okay. Very, very, very good point. I was assuming that you're all citizens of somewhere, but, We do not all think of, well, so I was going to say user or citizen later, but thank you very much for prompting me. I love this crowd. This is great. Okay. So because we're a little bit, so one of the things that we're going to do tomorrow is a kind of co-creative session. As we're building up our applied learning program, at the moment we're working kind of predominantly with governments or the UN, people like that. But as we're going forwards, especially in the dynamic capability work, some of the digital work, we're interested in building other kinds of programs, other kinds of work together. So one of the most exciting things about applied learning for me personally, as someone who experienced austerity 1.0 at the front line for the British government about 15 years ago, we don't talk about that. It's a very interesting time to be here now. I think what's really interesting about it is not just the kind of training, right? The kind of capacity building. I don't even like the term capacity building. We were talking to some people that we're working with in the UN, and they talk about capacity sharing. I like that a lot better, right? Because capacity building has a really kind of almost pathological term for me personally anyway. Okay, I was wondering if you were asking a question. No, you're just holding your phone up. That's fine. Okay, stop me if I go too far. So what I'd like you to do in the break, we want you guys to talk to each other and to us next, which is why we're doing a big coffee break. But as you're doing that, break exercise, goodness, okay. So find someone working on a similar challenge to you, and I hope you were looking around when we were talking about sectors. That doesn't mean challenge, as we know from the mission perspective. And with them, what's the one thing that I, selfishly, we should be doing more of when we think about this applied learning work? What's the one thing that we should be doing more of? Please come and bother me. If all the IIPPers can put their hands up as well. Yep, so bother any of these guys, but please bother me. And then we're going to be coming back to this after we've done a lot more of that kind of hourglass shape that Rainer was talking about tomorrow, and glean, I hope, a lot of learning and do some great co-learning. So thank you very much.